Meeting. I need a motion to amend the agenda. Moved by Mr. Lawrence. Second by Mr. Barrett. Any questions? All in favor? 5, 6, 7, 1, 7, 0, 7, 0. Lucy, the amendment.
To our, apologize. To our consent agenda, we're adding item 5P, resolution requesting Harrison County support and loan of a trailer for use at MGM Park during the Conference USA Baseball Tournament.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Glavin. Second by Mr. Lawrence. Any questions on it?
I want to apologize for introducing it, but because of our interlocal agreement and it has to get approved by the council and then it has to be put on the county agenda, it was necessary to put it on at the last minute.
Okay.
But this is for Conference USA, of course, to use a trailer during the Conference USA tournament. And there's a trailer out there that can be utilized so they can do their job.
All right, thanks, Mr. Glavin. Any other questions? All in favor? 6, 7, 7, 0. Motion carry. All righty. Need a
Motion to approve the agenda as
okay,
amended.
I need a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Mr. Lawrence, second by Mr.
Mr. President, I think we asked to table 5A. Is that, or you want
Okay.
4A?
Okay. Okay, we'll finish our amendment and then we're going to table it. Okay.
Well, we can table it.
Amend that.
Second.
Vote on the total. Okay. So there's an amendment, motion, moved by Mr. Deming, second by Mr. Dr. Tisdale. Subject to call. Okay. Any other questions on that? 4A, subject to call. Any other questions? All in favor? 7-0, motion carried. Now the agenda as a whole as amended. Is done? Okay, good. All righty. All right, Mayor's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to welcome everyone here to this meeting, and I'd like to ask the very best chief police we have to come on up and give us an update. I think you asked for a briefing on what's happening now, and here it is.
Good afternoon. So I handed everyone a copy of statistics. If you'd look that over, and I'll add a few things to it. The one thing that jumps out at you immediately are the total number of arrests. Everything else seems to be, from year to year, pretty substantial from year to year. But if arrests were up this year,
Chief, a little bit closer to me.
the arrests were up this year, and I think that was probably due to we had a smaller crowd and we had a good many officers out there. And then there were several other incidences that took place that would have led to the rise in arrests. One was 53 of the event-related incidents that we responded to. There were firearms involved. Some of those firearms were stolen, and some of them, there was some arrests made on those. There was also 58 automobile accidents, which was way up from previous years, and there were some arrests made in those also. And then there were several stolen autos. Now, this year we had a license plate reader that was set up on Highway 90 that would alert us if a stolen vehicle went by, and there were several of those also. So those all add to the increase in arrests. We had a couple of officers that were injured. Thank goodness that there wasn't severe injuries. They certainly could have been. And then I'll answer any questions that you may have about
Okay.
the statistics.
Any questions by the council? Mr. Barrett? Mr. Glavin? Dr. Tisdale? Mr. Deming?
I'm sorry, I'm reviewing some of these statistics.
Okay.
The firearm statistics, can you go over those with me? I know you just glossed over the firearm statistics, and I didn't really grasp what the significance was between the data from this year and the previous 2 years.
Yeah, this year there were several weapons that had been stolen, listed as stolen. And so arrests were naturally, more than likely, arrests were made on those also. And we paid close attention to this year on how many firearms that we actually dealt with. In previous years, they've just been there. If everything was legal, it may not have been documented. This year, we actually documented just so we could keep up with how many firearms were related to spring break.
And how many of the documented firearms, what percentage were illegal?
I don't know that any of them were illegal, but some were stolen.
I would call that
Yeah.
illegal.
Yeah, I don't have that number for you.
Okay. Now, it says you guys issued 209 traffic citations. Do we have any data on, has that increased? I mean, when I look at these numbers,
Yeah.
these are just calls for services and total cases generated, and then the offense and violations. The 209 traffic citations, is that in
There
the
was-
233 total offenses?
There was 270, I think, I'm going by memory, but 279 issued last year. So traffic citations were down considerably. Arrests were up, traffic citations were down.
Is that in the total 233? Are those citations part of that 233?
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting. Citations were down, but arrests were up.
Yes. And now, like I said, there could be any number of reasons for that.
Well, thank you. I for one, didn't have any calls at all this year about any of my residents complaining. So you guys did a good job in with regard to my residents, and so we thank you.
Well, thanks very much for telling us that.
Okay, that's it, Mr. Deming? Okay, Ms. Newman? All right, Ms. Lawrence?
All we ever hear about at Black Spring Break is the traffic control with the cones. How did you feel that went?
I think it works very well, and we know that it does because up to this event, we had less vehicle accidents and wrote less citations. We actually wrote less citations this year than we did last year, and I attribute most of that to the cones being in place. I think people are starting to relax. I think they understand why they're there, and this year we actually had to go to one lane for a while this year, and it made it possible for us to do that. If we had not had these cones in place ahead of time before the event ever started, we would not have been able to go to one lane and make an emergency lane. Traffic got so backed up we had to do that. And
So
we were
you-
able just to divert traffic and move right on. So they do work exactly the way that we hoped they would work. They're working.
So no problem with the emergency vehicles. Everything went well. If they had to move, they had to come. Ambulances, anything, fire trucks, no problems at all.
No, once we saw that it was backing up, we knew that would be an issue. At that point, we merged into one lane and had an east and a west bound emergency lane. So we were able to get fire department, AMR, and the police department where they needed to go in a timely manner.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And I have no questions, so thank you, Chief.
Chief, I think we actually did that with less personnel this year too, didn't we?
We did do it with less personnel. We had quite a few less out-of-towners
Yeah.
than we did last year.
So the impact dollar-wise was favorable for us.
Much less than last
Yeah.
year. Yes,
So
sir. I don't have the overtime amounts yet, but I will.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of our administration and the council, thank you and thank Chief, both police, fire, and public works for the things that were done. And I think the word got out from last year to this year, and I think things were more smooth than a lot of folks were even, were guessing. So
Well,
thank you all, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, council.
And thank you, Chief. Okay, Mayor?
That concludes my report, Mr.
All
President.
right, Mayor, thank you. Okay, we're gonna move on to departmental reports. Oscar Runda to give an update on infrastructure progress.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Matranga, the project manager for Oscar Renda Contracting. Tomorrow, we'll have asphalt crews back on site to install the remainder of the base course of asphalt on Main Street from around Tyrone's Barber Shop all the way to the railroad tracks. And and also on Esters from Keller all the way to Spanner, and then the southernmost parts, Lee Street, Nichols Street, and Keller from, there's, a little section that's not finished there. We'll be finishing, putting the base course of asphalt down to the railroad tracks on those 3 streets as well. Then we're going to installing surface course of asphalt on Division from Oak Street all the way to Lee Street, from Dory's, Brown, and Fountain Street, south of Division. We'll be installing that surface course of asphalt. We're installing sidewalks and driveways right now on Main Street. We're installing road base on Esters from Spanner, heading west. We'll complete the base course of asphalt on Esters, all of Esters, the middle of next month. We're also working in the CSX right-of-way, cutting off sheet piling, finishing up a few drainage structures that we have, and then we'll be out of the CSX right-of-way and hopefully off of Esters altogether with the base course of asphalt by middle to the end of next month. We've completed all but one of the driveways on Porter. There was a gas service that needed to be moved, and they did that last week. So I've done the driveways and sidewalks on Porter. We are working on water services and sewer main installation on Forest. We are installing road base on Bone Street. This will be the next street that'll get asphalt paving along, base course of asphalt, along with Esters about the middle of next month. And we're completing the drainage work on Kyvette, and we're making the turn with simultaneously onto Elder and also onto Strawberry with the drainage and finishing up the structures right there. We are working on storm drain structures on Fayard, Anglada, and Cruces, and should have those completed by the end of the week. After we complete the road base on Bone, we'll move into that area to start installing the road base on those streets. We're installing fences throughout the project, and we are completing landscaping on Porter, then moving to Nixon and Main Street to finish the landscaping there. That's all I got.
Okay, we have any questions? I'm going to start from the end. Mr. Barrett, Mr. Glavin, Dr. Tisdale, Mr. Deming,
I have nothing.
Ms. Newman, George?
No question.
Yeah, and you mentioned, and I have one question. You covered most of them. Walker Street, it's been a little problematic. Walker Street, Morris Community House, that's the area that is there a timetable on it?
Once we get finished with all the drainage pipe and structures on Elder, then that crew will move. We're trying not to disrupt that area too much because of all the additional drainage and structures that they put in, because of how Elder runs kind of into Walker. We're just trying to complete the work on Elder first and then hop over to Walker. So if I had to say, within a couple of months,
Okay, by the end of the summer?
yes.
Okay.
We're trying to take into account to school and schedules and stuff like that.
Okay. And you're basically saying from Lee Street east, you're doing finishing coating on that as of the next 2 weeks?
Once they get finished putting base, they'll be on site in the morning. Once they get finished, they're taking care of Main Street first, then Esters and Lee, Nichols, and Keller, those sections, and then they're going to start on Oak Street. I'm sorry, Division.
Division?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Thank you
Thank-
for your questions. Okay, with that being said, we're going to move on to our council report. George? No report. No report? Okay, Ms. Newman?
Yes, a reminder that we're having a Ward 3 council meeting Thursday, 6 p.m. at Donald Snyder Community Center.
Thank you. Mr. Deming?
No report.
Okay, Dr. Tisdale?
Yes, I hope everybody had a nice Easter. And only one observation, and that is on Highway 90 on the right-of-way, and also on Pops Ferry by the bridge and out to Causeway Park, there were a lot of boiled crawfish signs. The ones on Highway 90 were for the filling station, and the other one was for whatever it's called out at Causeway Park. So do we permit that? You know, I have to have something to fuss about since we can't do anything about feather flags. I'm thinking these signs may be the gateway to feather flags, but okay. So anyway, it may just be a phone call, giving somebody a heads up, whatever. Thank you. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is that Mr. Glavin?
Yeah, I got a few things. I tell you what, if nobody saw the rainbow this weekend, that has to be the most beautiful rainbow I ever seen in my entire life. You know, if y'all didn't see it over Biloxi, it was absolutely fantastic. And speaking of rainbows and good news, I'd like to commend Sherry Bell. She reported that we had the entire fields that were full of with a baseball tournament this past weekend. Also appreciate Chief Miller's last-minute support, and also Sherry Bell for Paul Lacoste 5K run and fitness test. We had a group of runners that ran over the bridge and back and under to Point Cadet Pavilion, did some fitness exercises there, and then finished up near Margaritaville and Harrah's, and it was a beautiful day then too. And that's all I got today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barrett.
No report.
No report. And I just have one thing. Again, happy Easter, like Dr. Tisdale said. Over at Henry Beck Park, we had about 200 people participate in the Easter egg hunt and celebrated Resurrection Day. And that concludes my report. All right, we're going to move on to public agenda. We have a total allotted time of 45 minutes, 3 minutes per person, 3 minutes per person, and that will be strictly enforced. I'm going to start with my left. Anyone on my left would like to come up and speak? Yes, sir. Come on up and state your name, address for the record, and please sign in.
I'm Tom Linenberger. I live at 2584 Rue Palafox in West Biloxi. I'm here to talk about pickleball. I want to talk about yesterday. The day started out at Donald Snyder with 45 seniors playing pickleball from 8 o'clock to 11:30. Out at the courts, pickleball courts, there was 9 seniors training and using pickleball machines. At 3 o'clock, we had a bunch of veterans come over from the VA. Currently, the city of Biloxi has a great program with the VA where we work with troopers or armed forces personnel that are enrolled in the mental health clinics. Guys with and gals with problems with addiction as well as PTSD. Twice a month we have them out at the courts. We invite a bunch, we feed them, play pickleball, and have a good time. Yesterday there was about 25. We also, at Donald Snyder, 4 days a week in the mornings, we have both inpatients and outpatients that we play pickleball with. And so far, we started this out the 1st of January, and we've had about 70 veterans so far that we played with. Then the day went on, and about 5 o'clock, about another 50 people showed up. The First Baptist Church of Biloxi has a fellowship program for their men that play pickleball on Monday nights. They have couples enrichment on Sunday nights, and there's generally about 30 show up for there. So the day of Monday brought about 110 pickleball players out to the courts, well as in Donald Snyder. Most of them are seniors. Why I'm bringing this up is that in the pickleball courts, you know, there's been about almost $52,000 of donor money, both from private donors to make that complex exist. as well as the county has helped us, and the state agencies have helped us as well. But we're in need of some money right now, because summertime brings us no place to play indoors, and for the last 3 years, we've been playing at the Gulf Coast Community College over on Switzer Road, Jeff Davis. They've been very good to us. It's cost us $4,500 for the 2 months, but what the dean, the vice president, does for the last 2 years is taken that money and used it to help keep Biloxi students in college, either with meal passes, bus passes, books, anything he can do, because it's state law that we must pay to play. And we've tried to get the county to maybe allow us to use the skate park, but that is to no avail. So I discussed this with Ms. Sherry Bell in Parks and Rec, and it looks like there's a budget shortfall.
Okay,
Mr.
sir, that concludes your time.
I'm sorry. So help us out, guys.
Yes, sir.
And ladies.
Thank you.
And Mayor.
All right. Would anyone else on my left would like to come up and speak? Anyone else on my left? Yes, come on.
I'm Sandy Ingersoll. I live at 1282 Beach Boulevard. And I have been speaking a number of times. I've submitted a number of emails. I just want to say one thing tonight. First of all, I appreciate all the consideration you've been doing. I understand that the Airbnb people are, trying to make a living for themselves and so on, just as we're trying to protect our home. I want to remind all of you on the council, though, we did our due diligence before we purchased. Our HOA rules said no short-term rentals, okay? That was changed by the owner after we had purchased. Okay, we have proven all this to you. We've brought all the documentation. We've sent pictures to show you that there's 48 doors that open up to one common area. Okay, that is our lawn, like you. When you want to go out and barbecue in your lawn, that's your lawn. We are just talking about having a barbecue with the owners again for the air show. This is our space. We paid a lot of money. I just paid my taxes to you guys. We frequent the casinos, the restaurants, we do everything. We are residents here. We live here. This is our home. To have somebody come in overnight and bring 10 friends with them and utilize everything that we have paid all that money for so that these people, short-term rental people, can make their living off from there is not fair to us. Okay, I know that Oak Shores and all of those other ones, that they don't have a rule in their HOAs that say no short-term rentals when those people bought. And I feel bad about that for them if they don't want them there. But we did. We had that in our rules, and I know you guys know because I've written it, I've spoken it and whatever, but I'm going to tell you again. My husband's been in the hospital 2 weeks. And I said to him, honey, I'm not going. He said, yes, you are, Sandy. He said, get this resolved. Now, we have come to every meeting you guys have had, in every zoning committee. We've talked to all of you. We've called. We've done everything we can to show you. There are places that don't open up 48 doors to common area. They go in their own separate door. They have their own separate barbecue and everything. We don't have that there. I called and invited the mayor to come and see our facility so he could see what we're dealing with. I'm going to extend it to you today. What I'm hoping and praying, and I am praying, that you will vote today, even if it's just complex by complex, and say we don't have short-term rentals anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else on my left? Come on, Ms. St.
My name is Wayne Hingen. I'm an attorney in Biloxi, and my offices are at 979 Howard Avenue. I represent the Marver family. I, along with them, attended your workshop earlier today. You've already heard, and I would hope understand my argument, but I did glean some things from that if you've heard them before, they're in different words, and maybe some of these you haven't heard. So let me go through a couple of items here. A short-term rental is like a business. It is an industry that is injected into a residential neighborhood. Zoning is to prohibit that. It allows a one-unit motel, and I know you've heard that one before, one-unit motel in a residential neighborhood. The Mississippi Gulf Coast, Biloxi, the rest of the cities down here are not the only ones that are dealing with this issue. I'm going to say 2 months ago, could have been longer, could have been shorter, the Sun Herald carried an article about the tremendous problem the city of New Orleans is having. Miami, in other publications, and even on the television media, Memphis, that I know personally about, and Atlanta, that I know personally about. My son resides there. Get it right the first time. Take those baby steps that I asked about before. The objective should be to protect the owner-occupiers of their single-family home. Businesses belong in business areas. Please recognize the difference between an owner-occupier and a tourist. By his very nature, a tourist is transient. He's not here to stay, and he's got no vested interest. So I submit again, take the residential designations, the zoning designations of RM20 and RM30, and put them in those areas where you are going to prohibit short-term rentals for good. If things change in the future, well, fine. But right now, those baby steps are required, otherwise you put these owner-occupiers at risk.
Thank you, Ms. Hingen. Anyone else on my left?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Huber-Giat. I live at 14362 John Lee Road. I would like a little bit more clarification from the 10:30 meeting. Mr. Creel indicated that there were 260 applications following the threat of the $500 fine, which, by the way, I'm in agreement with, because there were a lot of illegal operations. Later, he stated that most of the applications came from Oak Shores, Ocean Club, and another complex I can't remember. My question is, were they all illegal, or were the records from the fire marshal actually researched to find out if they were illegal, considering the fact that they were in a commercial business zone, which is a use by right? So I just want to have that clarification. How many of them were considered illegal versus those that just wanted to be safe instead of sorry because of the changes that could be coming up today? Also, having the Hotel and Lodging Association be involved in the short-term rental is almost like having, and that was because they had more funds and resources at their disposal. I was just wondering if that was more like Walmart regulating Kmart or like FedEx regulating Amazon for their delivery services. Just wanted a little clarification on the reason the Hotel and Lodging Association would be regulating short-term rentals, as it seems to be a competition. In my right as a property owner, I do have an issue with being lumped in with a neighbor with a different parcel number. The conditional use application as it stands gives me an individual parcel, which gives me an individual hearing. I would like an explanation on why we would be grouped together as a building as we are a per unit, as was actually indicated by Mr. Barrett. So thank you for clarifying these for me today.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Anyone else to my left?
Good afternoon. I'm Lyndon Brazier. I live at 1302 Beach Boulevard, right across from Cypress Cove condos. And I oppose having short-term rentals at Cypress Cove Apartments because we're in a residential neighborhood. So just
Thank you. Anyone else on my left? Okay, come on up, ma'am.
Here again. My name's Kathy Brunette. We are a resident owner at
Okay,
1282
ma'am,
Beach
pull the
Boulevard.
mic closer so we can hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
I don't have a lot to say. We've said so much over the last year. I've owned this, my husband and I have owned this for about a year. Something needs to be done and final because the tensions between the resident owners and the short-term owners is miserable to live with, and we're never going to get anything accomplished when it comes down to the association. We can't even be in the same room, and there's anger flying around. Please consider getting this done and vote on it today. I strongly encourage you. Thank you.
Okay, give us your name and address for the record.
Pardon?
For the record, your name and address.
Oh, 1282 Beach Boulevard,
Thank you.
Unit 116.
Okay, anyone else on my left? Okay, in the back, saw somebody in a hand go way up.
Good afternoon. I'm James Cascio, and I just want to go on the record to say, and I oppose short-term rentals at Cypress Cove. And I hope y'all do the right thing and keep it from happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, come on up in the back. On the left? Yes, sir. I want to spot it.
Hello there. I live at 262 Lemieux Street in Biloxi. I'm a lifelong resident of Biloxi. And I want to know from the city what people own these stores in this area, especially in the predominant Ward 2 in the black area. I know from the storm, a lot of these rodents and stuff that run, running the people property and stuff. But in these stores, you go to buy potato chips or cookies or something like that in the store, rats done bit in the bags and stuff. I want to know who is the person that checks on all this in the city, as far as like people buying product from Walmart and selling in this store for a real higher price than Walmart selling. And I know you get tax money from these places, but what I'm saying, this way the city is losing money because they getting this product, they ain't paying no taxes on it. They getting it from Walmart and selling out of these stores right here. I want to know who is the person that's supposed to be responsible for this, and that's all I want to know.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Hope. Okay, anyone else on my right? Okay, I'll get you next. I'll start on my right. I'm coming to the back next. On my right. Bobby Hope. Bobby Hope. Mr. Hope. Go ahead, Mr. Hope. We got you just on. To my right, yes, come on up.
Good afternoon. I have my notes in my phone, so I'm not ignoring y'all on Facebook. I just wanted to address a couple of things. I'm sorry, my name is Jacqueline Wilson. I'm the general manager for Biloxi Beach Resort Rentals. And earlier in the meeting, I was taking notes and I wanted to discuss a few things. Mr. Tisdale, you were talking about sales tax and the people who are not licensed with the city. Well, I did not know about the licensing with the city, and that's my fault. However, I have been paying sales tax since the beginning that the company has opened in 2007. Last year, we almost paid $700,000, as a matter of fact. So we do pay our sales tax. Now we have all of our applications in for 107 units between Oak Shores, Seabreeze, and Ocean Club. I believe all of my Seabreeze were inspected last week. That was about 43. They were inspected by this code and fire. So that has passed. And this week they're working on my Ocean Club units. So I would think that half of those permits actually belong to my company because, like I said, I have 107 out of those 260. You were talking about the rental platforms, and what you don't understand about those is that my company contracts a third-party company who actually advertises for us on Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com. So when you're asking for Airbnb or VRBO to require licensing, they're not going to do that because they have third parties who contract with businesses like myself. And we had a question, if conditional use does pass for all of the units, we have investors who do not live here. Some live upstate New York, France, Canada. If this does pass, do they have to be present for the public hearing? Do they have to be the ones to sign all these applications? Or could someone like myself who has a management company handle that for them? I hear a lot about hotel motel. Our condos are not hotel motel. We're governed by the Real Estate Commission. Some properties have 2-night minimum, some have 3-night. We have one, Bowview, who is strictly a 30-day minimum. They're long-term only. So we're not hotel motels. Now, I think a lot of people are getting the short-term stuff confused with Cypress Cove. I understand they're going through a lot in their area, but today we're here about conditional use and how we're going to move forward with short-terms. Cypress will have to figure that out on their own, I feel. That's a different animal. And also, we're not really sure why the Mississippi Hotel and Lodging Commission is going to be kind of governing who the short terms are. I'd like an explanation to that. And one more comment about a gentleman who spoke earlier. We do have guests who are considered transients, but a lot of them fall in love with our city, and they buy condos, and they stay here. And then they buy some for investment as well. So though they're transients for a few days, they do stay here, and they fall in love with the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to my right? Yes, sir. Ms. Stoward? Come on, Ms. Stoward.
Good evening. I'm Charlie Morrow. I have a unit at 1664 Beach Boulevard, which is Oak Shores. I bought it for a short-term rental. I bought it as an investment. And if we do not get the short terms, the Air Force will have a problem because they don't have enough housing over there. As of the past week, for 53 days, I have an officer from the Air Force from South Korea with his wife and 3 children, are staying at, 3 babies actually are staying in my unit. And there was nothing really available for him for that long term. There was nothing was on a base for him to take. My units rented mostly to the Air Force. And the reason for that is because they cannot stay on a base, whether they get their family with them or whatever. And on Airbnb, which I go through, they scrutinize everybody that is listed with them. They also rate me as an owner how my unit is, and then we rate them how they left the unit. And I think I got my unit over here for 3 years. I have never had one incident whatsoever of anything negative with the people that rented it or the way they left it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else on my right? Ms. Stallworth, I think you were next.
Good afternoon again. I made most of my comments earlier today. I am still imploring the council to make sure that there is a designated by right area. All that I've heard in this whole discussion deals with condominiums that may be in a commercial zone. If they're in R30 or 20 or 10, you already have them covered under the existing ordinance, and they have to go through conditional use. But to take away the rights to operate a business within the area, I think it's tantamount to destroying the business. So I'm asking and pleading that, if at all possible, I think there is a different kind of compromise that can be obtained to address the issue at hand. And that is those condominiums or apartments that are in commercial zones. You don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. This is an opportunity for small companies like myself to grow and develop in the business. I don't have millions of dollars to invest. My money is very little. But under your existing proposals, it would require me to try and get someone to sell me a piece of property on the contingents that it gets approved for short-term rental. And contrary to what we heard today, if there are 30 individual applications, all 30 of those have to have individual public hearings. And I've been around this city a long time, and it takes quite a while to get through this whole process. So I'm asking you to please keep in the ordinance a by right zone. Nobody's arguing about commercials. You know, a barber shop is not going to be upset by a short-term rental, or a bank is not going to be upset by a short-term rental, or any other commercial business is going to be upset. I don't propose going into residential areas, but if everybody has to go through a short-term rental, property is probably a lot cheaper in a commercial, in a residential area than it is commercial. So I think you're really hurting the intent. I support the other provisions. Basically, the fine, $500, I don't have a problem with. The fees, I don't have a problem with. Making sure that there are life safety issues, I don't have a problem with. But I do have a problem in trying to make sure that I have the ability to continue to grow the business that I'm seeking. And I would ask you to please keep this into consideration. As I said earlier, uncertainty is the worst thing that a business can go through. You see it in the stock market. If there's an uncertain period, we're going down. If there are people who are trying to do business and it's uncertain what the city wants them to do, they go to another area where they want it. This is the same thing. So please, if you can, do something positive. Keep the short-term rental in commercial districts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stallworth. Anyone else on my right?
Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Smith from 1664 Beach Boulevard, and I support short-term rentals in Biloxi. There's a valuable place for short-term rentals in Biloxi for military families and for vacation people. People want to bring their families to the beach, and the whole thing about the ordinance changes is under consideration now to protect residential areas and residential people from being invaded, but at the same time giving rights to people who own property that are short-term renting them. So I think this is moving in the right direction, and that's about all I got to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank the gentleman in the back.
My name is Benjamin Sims. I live at 145 Gill Avenue. Thanks for letting us attend your workshop this morning. I just wanted to go through a couple of things, questions, some of them hopefully will get addressed through this process. The bill before you either states or by omission defers to the original code. Number one thing it does is an outright ban on any February monthly, month-to-month rentals. That's just a fact. It's a 30-day minimum. There'll be a $500 a day fine if I rent to someone from February 1st, even in a leap year, to 29 until I kick them out. I find that to be a flaw in the law. Clarify that when the conditional use carries forward, does a prior license under the current law, post the law change, mean that the unit is automatically allowed? Mr. Creel indicated if they go through the new conditional use process, it will carry forward. However, these 270 units that are in the backlog are currently in a zoning that is by right and is a license application. Therefore, when they go to sell, I do not believe it is the case that just because they had a short-term license, that can be transferred to a future buyer. So I feel like the change in the zoning is, in fact, diminishing the property value of those that are having their commercial zoning right of short-term in it taken away. Third, this states, Creel and Mr. Barrett were going back and forth about the parcels versus the buildings. This current law clearly states the parcel is entitled to its own hearing. Every condominium unit is its own parcel. Now, just because they have acted in such a way to lump together and let us all have our cases when we were united does not mean that that was following the legal process of the Land Development Code. And I really think the council should think about whether or not they are going to have dozens, potentially hundreds of individual case hearings if someone decided to press that issue on the application process insofar as just saying, oh, well, it's Oak Shores, Sea Breeze, and this, we'll just lump them all together and it'll take no time. No, you're going to be sitting here every 3 times a month after zoning commission, 2 times a month, with 5 to 10 applications when that commission should be focused on much more macro issues than every single person who wants to rent their condo on the beach. What this bill also does not accomplish is a clarification of the conditional use requirements. There are 9 broad categories, so broad that at one of our hearings, the director even stated, I could argue either way on the compliance of these 9 categories and still recommended a denial. Either put it in there that neighbors have a right to tell you what you can do in your bedroom, in your house, or say they don't have a right to it. But these hypothetical things about what if they violate rules later when they're in there is not a way to legislate.
Okay, sorry, your time is out. Okay, did I miss anyone? Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, we're going to consider the public hearing closed. We're going to move on to the policy agenda. Ordinance A was taken off. Ordinance B, the second reading.
Ordinance to approve a zoning map amendment for zoning classification of A, agricultural, to NB, neighborhood business, and RMD, high density for property identified as 1751 Pops Ferry Road.
Okay, that was, who was the move and second by?
Mr. Glavin and Mr. Tisdale.
Okay, Mr. Glavin, you have any comments on it?
Yeah, this is simply a parcel of land. It's at the corner of Pops Ferry and Cedar Lake, and it's currently zoned as agricultural. The owners would like to put it on the market and see what the market value is. Immediately to the south are apartments that have been there for some time. To the west is Fat Baby Elise's. So there's commercial on the other side of it, and they're asking for some of it to be zoned multifamily, high density, and part of it neighborhood business. I ask that y'all would support the zoning change.
Okay. Dr. Tisdale?
Yep. Mr. Creel, do you remember what the Planning Commission vote was on this? I looked in the transcript, but didn't see. Right. Right. And that's what I recall, but I didn't see it in there. Thank you. I cannot add anything to what Mr. Glavin said. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments? Okay, we're going to call for the question. All in favor? Okay, 7-0. Motion carries. Okay, ordinance, let's see, C.
Ordinance to amend the Biloxi Land Development Ordinance pertaining to short-term rentals.
Lawrence and Mr. Gaines. Okay, Ms. Lawrence, do you have any comments?
Plenty of comments from everybody. It's pretty exciting, isn't it? Gives everybody a chance to speak a little bit. we put this on the table, and we still have a lot of discussion. I think a lot of the council has questions, a lot of people have the questions. So what I want to do is just put it on the table, let everybody start speaking their mind, and see where we want to go from here.
Okay. Mr. Barrett?
I guess like everyone has said for the last year, this is something that's come up regularly. And I know whatever we decide today probably won't be the final thing that we do, but I do believe we need to make a decision today and start implementing some steps so that we have a plan and we don't just end up back here. We live in a tourist town, and so we have to, while we have to protect our current citizens and their residential neighborhoods, we do live in a tourist town, and we have a lot of people who visit from out of town that do prefer this type of lodging. And as far as the way the ordinance, the proposal is written, Mr. Creel and the Planning Commission, we ask y'all to do this, and I believe there's a lot of good in that. What I would recommend, and I'll put it on the table for a vote, is I would like to leave the language, allow it to remain as is, except I would like to add number 2, number 3 from the second sentence, starting at individuals through the end of number 2, and then all of number 4 to what we currently have, which, you know, that basically covers the $500 fine, the $100 permit fee each year, the inspection by the fire department, the lights, the signs, the parking, and all of that. But it doesn't, it still allows the use by right to those who have that currently. To those who have units, and I know that Cypress Cove has been a contentious conversation that we've had, and you know, there are places that are good for short-term rentals and there are places that aren't good. And I know that there's people that went and blindly invested money, and to those people, you know, I'm sorry, but you invested your money into a property that was not zoned for short-term rental, and therefore, unless the zoning is changed, you cannot use that for a short-term rental. I believe there's some other things that we can do, that we can add to the ordinance that would help. One of those would be future developers that come to the city. We could sort of find out what their intentions are for short-term rentals and have them include that whenever they're selling those properties to to buyers or investors, so that people that don't want to be in a unit or a complex that has short-term rentals, or maybe is going to have them or plans to have them in the future, they know clearly whether that's the intention or not. Another thing I believe that we could do is for those who repeatedly violate and are given a $500 fee, I believe that after a certain number of violations, and I don't know what that magic number is, that we could bring them before the council, and the council could determine whether or not those people could continue to have a license to operate short-term rentals in the city. Or we could put them on some type of probation for a certain period of time for those that continually violate it. So that would be what I would recommend. You know, the number 2, number 3 from the second sentence, and then all of 4, B through J, and then adding those couple of other addendums to the ordinance. And I think that would be a good step forward going, and then, you know, like I said, I know that wouldn't be the final answer, and there would be amendments later on. But I do feel that we need to make a step and make a move today, and that's what I would propose.
Okay, Mr. Glavin.
All right, so, and I think what I'm hearing Councilman Barrett say, we're not going to change any of the current classifications in zoning. So the zoning stays as is for conditional, residential, you can't put short-term rentals in, and commercial, it stays as is as well. It is permitted by right. Correct. The changes that Mr. Barrett is recommending is all those stipulations that the Planning Commission had outlined for the council. And again, I commend your good work on that. We charged you with bringing something to the council that we could consider making the LDO better, and I think we have an opportunity to do that. So I'll join my colleague from Ward 7 in supporting his recommendation.
Okay, Dr. Tisdale.
Yes, and I want to repeat a couple of comments from the workshop this morning and a few things that I wrote down. And I wasn't able to get all the questions down, but some of the questions that were raised during citizens' comments were all applicants that I guess are waiting now for permits. Were they operating illegally? And the answer to that question is yes. If they didn't have a permit to operate, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Creel. That's right. Exactly. Right. And at that time, we had 16 or 17 that were licensed appropriately. So everybody waiting in line, some might have been operating illegally, some may not have. The other thing was a question about the hotel, motel, lodging, and their involvement. Really, my understanding is all they do is verify. They said they'd be willing to check that if there's a short-term rental operator that I guess they've registered, if that's what the term is, with the Department of Revenue. So that's their only involvement. They don't make any decisions. They just send a name up to the Department of Revenue, I think, or maybe make a phone call, and that's it. And there might have been, and I'm sure there were other questions. I didn't get them all down, but question about condos. So I know we had Ms. Wilson, whose comments referenced condos, I think, and some condos may permit in there, I don't know if it'd be a deed or a lease or some sort of restriction on the deed. Some allow short-term rentals and some do not allow for short-term rentals. And my thought is, and I'll outline my position just briefly, Mr. Hengen spoke about prohibiting short-term rentals in all residential zones and permitting them by right in all commercial zones, as we now permit, and I like that idea. The twist, and that's why I asked about the condos, is that because condos, you said earlier, are considered RM20, RM30.
In most cases, yes.
In most cases.
There are some in commercial zones.
Right, and those in commercial zones, given my preference, would be permitted by right.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking if these condos prohibit short-term rentals, I would think maybe that could be written into the ordinance that they're not permitted. All right, that would coincide with what that condo permits now. If they permitted, if it was in an RM20 or RM30 and they permitted short-term rentals and that was in their lease agreement, I wouldn't have any problem with that, even though it's residential, because it's stated in the lease agreement. And I know the counter to that, and your observation might be, well, we don't have any, the city doesn't enforce covenants or anything, but
we
I'm
believe
thinking.
we have that covered. We believe we already have that covered because, again, a condominium complex is a vertical subdivision. And when the vertical subdivision is filed, there are covenants that are filed with that vertical subdivision. So just like any other normal subdivision where all the houses are at grade, if there's a prohibition or an allowance in there for short-term rental, then it would show up there. And the way we've got it covered is that we have the statement in here that says that it has to be in compliance with the covenants or deed restrictions, and the burden is on the owner to provide us with that information so that we can make a determination as to whether or not they can actually file an application.
So even though it's in an RM 30s, a 20 or 30 zone, if there's no deed restriction on short-term rentals, then they
would still have to come for conditional use right now under the ordinance that it exists.
Right.
If the covenants allow it and they bring in a copy of the covenants to show us that the covenants allow it, they would still have to go through the planning commission for.
But if we did away with conditional use entirely, all right, and went with permitted by right commercially, prohibited residentially, my thinking is, in the case of condos, if there's no restriction, whether it's RM 30 or not, if there's no restriction to prohibit short-term rentals, they would be permitted to do so as any other commercial business would do, because it's spelled out.
Yeah, our responsibility would be to enforce the zoning ordinance. If the zoning ordinance says no short-term rental, it really wouldn't matter what the subdivision covenant said. We would be enforcing the LDO.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Okay. If there's a conflict, if their covenants say that they can do it, but our zoning ordinance says they can't do it, our job is to enforce the ordinance, which says that they can't do it.
Right, but if we're revising this ordinance now, couldn't we put language in there that would permit that? If
Well,
there
the
were no
language in there
such.
that permits it now is a conditional use
But that's, right, but what I'm trying to do, and what I'm really trying to do here is get to market certainty. So that folks, because that's one of the flies in the ointment here. And the conditional use seems to create more tension on that topic. So if we just stuck with permitted and prohibited, then the only gray area in my mind would be those condos that are RM 30s, that aren't commercially zoned, but they're zoned residential. And if there are no deed restrictions on short-term rental, and in fact that's what the agreement says, then they would be treated just as any other permitted by right commercial entity or zone.
If we, what you're asking is, do we put an exception in there? Could we put an exception in there for that?
Right.
Certainly, you can put an exception in there for existing condos where the plat's already filed. Now, I'd remind you, you'd probably get back into the situation that we now have at Cypress Cove.
Well, I understand that, and the thing is, in looking back on this, and I have to choose my words carefully because I've spoken with lots of people on both sides of the issue, and it's nothing personal, but to them it's personal because in this case it's their business. But if everybody had done the right thing from the get-go, and if you didn't know, you would have asked somebody, then a lot of this could have been avoided.
That's correct.
But we are where we are, and I'm very sensitive. I mean, I spoke with Mr. Stallworth and a couple of other folks, but my preference would be to make this as settled and as clear as possible, permitted by right or prohibited. And the only gray area then would be, to my way of thinking, would be those condos where short-term rentals are permitted. So anyway, I've said what I had to say. I'll sit back and listen.
I just have one thing. Could a condo apply for commercial zoning? Could a condo
Certainly.
apply?
Any property can apply for commercial
So then that's a
zoning.
way that an existing condo unit that is having problem with the R30.
Well, that's exactly what happened with Oak Shores.
That's right.
Yeah, Oak
So
Shores came in.
that's
they
the
were
avenue for
multifamily,
them
yes.
to.
And
become
because
compliant.
Oak Shores was surrounded by commercial zoning, there was, other than a few residents that lived there who were opposed to it, there was no objection from the surrounding property owners, so.
Okay. Mr. Deming?
Can you, I know this has already been talked about, but clarify the process for vertical subdivisions like condos. Now, earlier, you and Mr. Barrett had an exchange, and I think there was a misconception based off what you said that a condo itself would apply in all of those units. However, they are individual parcels.
That's right.
So would they not have individual hearings?
We did that as a convenience.
I'm sorry?
We did that as a convenience, and it's perfectly allowed. If you'll go back and look at the cases when they went to the planning commission, there were individual parcel numbers.
Bring the mic a little closer.
Okay. If you go back and look at the planning commission cases, we did this as a convenience for them. Instead of having individual hearings for each unit, where there was a multi-units and there were several in the same building, what we did in some cases was we put the parcel number on there for the property, but we put the unit numbers on there as a convenience for the people so that it could all be heard at one time. And if there were some specifics about one particular condo unit, maybe having some problems or issues or whatever, they would have the right to bring that up. But in this case, the case was either decided based on whether or not they thought that the location was appropriate or not appropriate for short-term rental.
So if in that situation, and I understand the convenience, if you have a hearing on those current applications, does that prohibit a different unit owner in the future coming back to you, and would we then be subject
No.
to another hearing?
No, as a matter of fact, we expect that to happen. We expect that there'll be some unit owners in Ocean Club, for example, that originally either were living there and decided to sell, and some investor buys it for short-term rental. We would expect that new owner would come in and probably file a separate application to come. But no, there's no prohibition.
So we could potentially have a hearing
Yes.
for every individual unit then in a
Right.
condo.
Well, and let me mention something too. The Planning Commission was very aware of this. They knew that this is going to add to their burden of having public hearings, but they felt that it was more important to get the information in and to have more public hearings. The public hearings will be held over there, and basically what it'll do is come to y'all as a approval or denial item. So.
Right. I just wanted to clear the air for those that felt like if someone in that condo was denied, then they would have no right to apply with the city.
Yeah.
And then, once denied, what is the process? Do they have recourse?
It's
I mean,
yes.
of course, they can appeal it to us, but outside of that, do they have a time frame for which they can bring the action again?
Well, anytime an application is denied for a zoning change or conditional use, there's a 2-year wait period for that applicant to come back unless there's a significant change to the application. But the city council always has the right to waive that 2-year period.
All right, I want to direct your attention to a couple issues in your declaration of policy, monitoring 1, 2 through whatever numbers we have here. In 3, it said the privileged tax license shall not be transferred. Now, we talked about grandfathering and actually transferring it out in the hallway earlier. How does
The conditional use permit can be transferred. The privileged tax license always has to be in the name of whoever owns the business that's
but that
operating
won't
there.
affect the transfer of the privileged.
No, all they do is walk into our office, and if they comply with everything else, we change it over. We can do that in 5 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Barrett, in your suggestion, I would ask if we could strike, as we talked about it earlier, strike the language license plate number from 2 and add driver's license number or identification number, ID number. That's in number 2.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the 5th line down or so, license plate number to change. We discussed that in the previous meeting. Let's see. And then, of course, we also talked about the irrelevance of providing the names of the agencies that you work on. Again, most of it's third parties. 4th or 2nd, they don't support us in requiring business licenses. They don't support us. And if they're on our rolls, we don't need to track them through Airbnb or through VRBO because they're on our rolls already.
Well, there are some advantages to that, okay? When people are listing, they either list individually, they list it themselves, or they list with a local real estate agent or management company that handles that, or they list with Airbnb. If they're telling us that they list with Airbnb, we know where to go to monitor.
Well, if they're telling us that they want a license, we know where to go to monitor because the
Yeah.
unit is what they're getting the license for. We don't need to go to Airbnb to ask them if they're renting because they came to us to get a license to rent. We know
Yeah.
how to monitor them. They've applied, so we have contact with them. They're obviously in compliance for those purposes. Following up on them with Airbnb or VRBO, that's not going to provide us any assurances that they're going to notify them of a fine, pay a fine, require permitting, look at leases or deeds or whatever. I just see that's a duplicit requirement. It's pointless to require them to share that information with us if they are already operating legitimately.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense. It's just putting us. So are we going to hire somebody?
Well, remember, all of this is part of the application process here. And whether the language is in there or not, I mean, whoever we have, and we're going to have somebody doing this full-time, is going to monitor Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway on a continual basis to look for short-term rentals that are operating without a license. So whether it goes in there or not, we're still going to do the same thing.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Makes no sense.
There's VRBO, there's Airbnb, there's Booking.com.
HomeAway, Booking, yes.
So there's more than just 4 or 5
That's
of
right.
these deals that rent out vacation short-term rental deals, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And there are reviews on these that, you know, we can go to check reviews to see. You know, sometimes you find language there like, we loved our weekend, which counters the argument, oh no, we're only renting for a month at a time. Well, you know, we can.
Well, how many people are we hiring to do that, or is it taking away from the services?
Well, just like anything, we're going to start with one. We're not hiring anybody. We're going to, I guess it's okay. Okay. We're actually transferring someone from one department to another, and they will be a code enforcement officer assigned to short-term rental, and their job will be to monitor this on a full-time. But we'll start with one person, and we'll just see.
I just think it's a waste of our energy if they're telling us, if they're licensed legitimately, and we're going to appoint an employee when we don't have enough code enforcement on the ground already. We're going to take one off the field, put it in an office to monitor websites, to monitor people that are operating legitimately. I just think that's a waste of our youth.
Well, we're not looking for the people that are operating legitimately. We're looking for the ones that are operating illegitimately.
I'm saying, Mr. Baird, I would like to, in your amendment,
Yeah.
I would like to strike that language from 3. The rest of 3 is fine, but I think that requiring them to continuously update the city on where their third parties are.
Do they have to continually do it, or is it just on the initial application
Just
process?
the initial application, yeah. And then there's a change that they want to make us aware of later on.
So are we going to, I mean, I still think it's a ridiculous issue. And then even the deeds, they're going to have to bring a copy of the deed in. Are we going to do a title search on it to make sure it's a valid or updated deed?
Well, it says, we just wanted to make sure that we were covering both, whether there's a subdivision covenant or a deed restriction. Now, for the most part, it's going to be a subdivision covenant that determines
The LDO
that.
supersedes deed restrictions. I think that's somebody else's responsibility to follow up on. I think we're getting into the business of inserting ourselves into titles of land and titled use of land if it doesn't violate the LDO. I don't know. I just think a lot of this is absurd and, in my opinion, asinine. And it wastes.
I disagree. I think it actually saves us time, because if someone comes in with a subdivision covenant restriction that says that it's not allowed, then we put the ball back in the court of the applicant that this is something you're going to have to go resolve with your homeowners association before you come back in and make an application to the city. So I actually think it saves us a lot of time on our end.
Well, I think that's their time that it's wasting. And then when you just talk about a deed, I do title work, and somebody puts a restriction on a deed.
Yeah, I don't know that we've had one deed restriction on any of these applications that we've seen so far. So that was just language that was put in there so that we could consider it if it was brought in.
I would just hate for us to insert ourselves in some legal battle because somebody
And that's what we're trying to
filed
avoid.
the wrong deed and we allowed something to happen or didn't allow something to happen, and then something occurred down the road. We're just opening ourselves up to something, and it might be minuscule. This may never occur, but why require it, and why waste our staff's time and energy on something like that when they could be used to do something much more significant for our city?
Well, again, that would be something that we would address right at the beginning of the process. When someone comes in with an application, we can turn the application around and let them go resolve that issue instead of us being caught in the middle of it. Again, kind of like we are with Cypress Cove, where we've got people fighting over the covenants here of what was in place when they bought their unit. We don't need to be involved in that kind of a situation, and this catches it on the front end so that our people aren't wasting their time.
Well, yeah, we're involved in it right now. I mean, that's
After the fact, yes.
the problem is we are involved in it, and that's the
Yeah.
purpose we're here right now.
Mm.
Mr. Barrett, I will support what you're suggesting, with the exception of just a few housekeeping from the language that I suggested in here. But as far as leaving the by right in commercial zones, I think that's good language. Now, just to clear things up, if we didn't change the language of the by right, or the conditional use, where does that leave RM20 and RM30? Is it
Well,
still
RM30 would,
conditional?
20 and 30 would remain the same. I
As
mean, unless you,
conditional?
all right, it's a conditional use in both of those right now, and unless y'all, the council votes to approve some specific change, it would remain in effect as conditional use.
Right. And Mr. President, I don't have any at the moment. Would you come back?
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Newman?
So regardless, for Cypress Cove, regardless if we approve this current ordinance or keep it the same, they're under a conditional use approval, right?
RM20 and RM30, and they are RM30, yes, in Cypress Cove. That is a separate issue. What you're voting on now is just the recommended changes to the ordinance.
Okay. Thank you. George?
This has no impact on the majority of the people that are here or why we're here for the most part. I'm correct?
Well, let me make sure, I've tried to make this as clear as I could, but let me make sure that because there were some people that questioned me right before we left for lunch. There still seems to be some confusion about the people being grandfathered in. If you get grandfathered in, if you get your complete application in before any changes to the ordinance, you would be grandfathered in. And if you decide to sell that unit or will it to your children or whatever, that grandfather clause would continue with the unit. So there would be no stopping on it unless someone chose to stop for a period of a year. The same thing with conditional use. This is why we didn't think that the conditional use would be a deterrent to economic development. If someone comes in and goes through the process and gets approved for conditional use, and then they decide to either will that unit to their children or sell it to someone, the conditional use goes with the land. It doesn't expire just by a change in ownership. And there were some of the people that had stepped up here to oppose this that after I explained that to them again said, well, then we have no opposition to it.
And that's why I wanted to clear up the difference,
so-
the language with the tax, the privileged tax license, so everyone understood that there is a difference. I'm not comfortable with wiping out the by right in all the zones. I'm not comfortable with that. So as this ordinance stands, unless we amend it as Mr. Barrett suggests, I can't support this one as it stands. I'm done.
Are you saying you can't support it
I think that I can support it if we revert it back to allowing by right in commercial zones. I think so. I think
that's what we currently are, yeah.
Okay.
Right, that's the amendment.
And just for clarity,
We just add the stuff.
No, right, the current LDO, right, not, I'm saying you wanted to amend it to add the language which would make the LDO amended. And so now the amended LDO with the original language and the additions that you're suggesting. Correct. I can support.
let me mention something just for clarity too. When the Planning Commission held the second meeting where we were dealing with this in single-family zoning, we went back and held the public hearing. There was a recommendation on its way back to the City Council that we allow it as a conditional use in NB zoning. At the time, it was not allowed in NB or in LB, and we still recommend that it not be allowed in LB, which is limited business, because that's typically a homework type situation where you've got houses right next door and you've got a professional business in here. So we still recommend that, but there was a recommendation from the Planning Commission that it be allowed as a conditional use in NB. So I want to make sure that when we say allowed in commercial, not allowed in residential, there are distinctions in the commercial zonings. So what has been recommended is that we allow it as conditional use in NB, and then what I'm hearing is that we would allow it in any other commercial zone where hotels are allowed, which would be CB, RB, DT, WF, which are the upper commercial zones.
I think your proposal, has conditional use for NB, CB, RB, DT, WF, and all the other ones. I think where it's at now is.
Yeah, it was allowed as conditional use. That was the recommendation. Okay, but now we're talking about allowing it as a use by right. So what I wanted to make sure we added is that it be allowed as a, if we're going to do this, let it be allowed as a conditional use in NB, because right now it's not allowed at all in NB.
Okay, all right, thank you. George?
So what would you, we decided on the conditional use? We're gonna leave it in, we're gonna take it out, or we're gonna utilize it at all? Everybody got their opinions down there, so I mean, I need to find out exactly which way they're going. On the conditional use.
I think Nathan had said it best. Nathan, could you go over that one more time? Because I think he
The
said it
conditional
best
part, right.
on that condition.
Say, ask the question. I didn't hear George. I'm sorry.
The amendment that you are proposing.
About the
conditional use. About the conditional use.
Okay.
About the ordinance.
So currently, okay. Yeah, and adding NB as a conditional use, I have no problem with that, because I believe there are some areas that it can apply, but there are some areas that it wouldn't go.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure that everyone else is okay with that. Okay, so yeah, that's fine. We can add NB to that as a conditional use. I have no issue with that at all. Okay, so my amendment is basically leaving the language in the current ordinance we have, but adding all the suggestions that they suggested in this updated ordinance, minus the, I can't even think of the.
It would be allowed as conditional, it would remain a conditional use in RM20 and RM30.
Yeah, it would.
It would be allowed as a conditional use in NB and as a use by right in CB, RB, downtown, and regional business, and in the PD districts that we call them.
So George, basically, everything would stay the same, except for we would add the stipulations that they suggested, and then we would add that you can put neighborhood business as a conditional use as well. But the ones that are currently conditional use would stay conditional use. So that would still come before us, but those that are in an area that by right would stay by right.
Prohibited, you're still A, AR, RE, RER, RS5, 7.5, and 10.
All of those
We're
are
also
single-family
implementing
residential, so.
We're also implementing a $100 yearly fee for the application and permit fee, and then the $500 fine per. And then after, and this is something we can discuss, but after a certain number of violations, I would suggest that someone come before us and we determine if they can continue to do business as a short-term rental in the city, or suspend it for a certain amount of time or something to that effect.
So would that be code enforcement, would bring it to the council and say these properties are in violation?
Right. What we would do is we would keep up with any criminal activity there with the police department. We'd work with them, and we'd bring anything to your attention that creates a public nuisance situation.
And we could revoke a conditional use?
Or we
You can put them on probation. You can give them a limited amount of time to correct it. If they don't, you always have the right to revoke the conditional use permit.
Okay.
One question I might have brought up was, people coming to these short-term rentals, everybody flocking in to do that, but they come with 5 boats, 6 trucks. Where are you gonna park at?
Well, that's
Keep
one
saying
of
that 15, 20 people in these rooms.
Well, didn't we move the parking requirements as well, as
Yeah,
far
they
as
got
how
one.
much they
They
can
got
take
one
and all
parking
that?
place.
There's
60%.
one parking space is required per unit, which means per bedroom for however many bedrooms that unit has.
Explain the 60% for me.
60% is just something that was in another place. That would only affect you if they were building a new unit specifically for short-term rental. Then they have to leave a certain amount of green space, a certain amount of pervious surface around the unit. But anything that's existing is existing, and we would just go ahead and grandfather that in.
If they bought 6 trucks and 5 boats, would that be a violation?
Well, the ordinance
Had no
doesn't,
place to park, I mean.
ordinance doesn't specifically say that, but there again, you're going to be getting into a situation where you're going to have some resident owners that are going to be upset that their parking spaces were being taken by
So
short-termers.
so in that case, they're abusing the rights of the people that's living there. So, I mean, you gotta have some kind of regulation.
That's why we thought the conditional use was the way to go. See, we can get a lot of these questions answered at the planning commission, so.
And, Peter, I think you gotta give me the law that states you can grandfather in an application. Where's the law? I'd like to see that law.
Need
That
some
you can
grandpa-
grandfather in an application.
Need grandpa law for grandpa?
Say again?
Okay. Need some grandpa law?
Yeah.
Okay.
Grandpa law. Dr. Tisdale?
It's been a long day. I want to be sure I understand this. The current ordinance stays as it is. It's permitted by right in most commercial zones where hotels are permitted.
That's correct.
Hotels. Conditional use would be RM20 and RM30, and we would add to that
NB.
neighborhood business.
That's correct.
Okay. Would be prohibited in all the other remaining residential areas. And then there's some other requirements, and Robert has disagreed with a point or two, but I think overall everybody seems to be in agreement on that. And this is a rhetorical question, and that is, is the market more certain if I'm a short-term rental investor? I still have the same conditional use hoops to jump through that I do now. And we would still have the same issue with apartment complexes that might be flipping or have flipped to condos. The only advantage would be if you are one of those owners, kind of in the gray area conditional use, that you've already filed your application and you're in line waiting, and you would be grandfathered. So let's take whether it's a condo or an apartment complex, RM20 or RM30, and I'm one of those owners, and I've not filed an application, so I'm not grandfathered in. But half the condos or half the apartments complexes, those units, have been grandfathered in. How can you deny me a permit, or how can you deny me a conditional use? How is that defensible if you don't allow me to do that and I take you to circuit court? How can you defend? Peter, you know what I'm saying?
Okay, all right, then we're talking about RM20 and RM30.
Correct.
Which are going to remain conditional use. So anyone coming in would still have to go through the conditional use process
right.
to get approval. There'd be no grandfather situation in the conditional use situation. Everyone would still have to come in. The grandfathering that we're talking about, and grandfathering typically affects an ordinance in two ways. You have the grandfather situation where we go out and annex new property,
right.
and there are people that are operating with legitimate existing business licenses.
Understood.
We have to accept those, whether we like it or not. They're grandfathered in, and as long as they keep that license renewed every year, they're grandfathered in. It typically works the same way here. If someone comes in under our current ordinance and they get a legitimate business license as a use by right to operate short-term rental, and then the ordinance change, and this is not just short-term rental, this would be with any business. If the ordinance changes and the regulations change, as long as those people keep their legitimate business license up to date, they're grandfathered in. Only if they stop for a year and they lose their grandfather status do they have to come back in and start at square one again.
I understand that, but I'm saying if I purchase one of these RM2030 units, one of these dwellings, and I'd like a conditional use, how is the city?
It's grandfathered in.
No. If the unit I'm buying was not grandfathered in.
Okay.
And I apply, how can you deny me at that point when, say, most of that apartment complex has been grandfathered in? How?
Only if there was something very specific about that particular unit that really raised a question, like if there were real life safety issues inside.
Then you would approve
something
it.
like that.
Simply, and the point I'm trying to make is, once there's one unit in a complex that's been approved, grandfathered or otherwise, anybody else who comes along after that, the city does not approve that conditional use at great peril and perhaps some legal cost. So once you approve a unit under these circumstances, grandfathered or not, pretty much the rest of those units on that property are going to be flipped at some point. The city really doesn't have a whole lot of leverage to prevent that. That's the only point I wanted.
That's right.
Okay, go ahead, George.
This is not Jerry Ackley, this is Kenny Glavin. I still have a problem how we gonna collect.
I can't hear you, Mr. Lawrence.
This is Kenny Glavin.
Okay.
How we collect that 12%, because I was talking to him earlier, and what he told me is not a good story. So could you explain the problem y'all have with the Hotel Motel Association? How they collect the money, who don't pay it, how you keep up with them? Are they 5% short? They pay 7%, not 12%? And how you get the other 5%?
But I don't think that's, I think it's well documented all across the nation that is a question. And I think it's been documented in our meetings here. There's people that admittedly say that they've paid it, or they're paying the 7%. They didn't realize there was a 5% occupancy tax. These steps, however, I think kind of lead us in the right direction. You're asking for things during the application process. I think it educates the owners and investors during that process, and it informs them, what their obligation is. And some are very astute at running short-term rentals in their businesses. They're well aware of it, and they're in full compliance. Others, either intentionally or unintentionally, are not in full compliance. But these steps, that if we take this step today, I think it moves us in a positive direction, ensuring that we're in compliance. We have safe lodging establishments, and we are collecting the taxes appropriately. There is still the question of internet tax. Mr. Barrett's astute at that because he runs some internet businesses, I guess, or is involved with some of that stuff. And there's what's it called?
There's nexus laws in place. So a company that has a certain amount of representatives in a state is required to collect the sales tax for those representatives. The liability does not fall upon the person who is renting the unit. It falls upon VRBO or whatever. And it's just like internet sales. If you have like an online network marketing company and you have a certain amount of representatives in a state, you're required, as the company that these representatives are selling for, you're required to collect the sales tax when someone goes into the system and buys it. And the liability for that sales tax falls on you to submit it to that state monthly or however they collect it. And there's software systems for they're out there. Lots of companies offer software for that.
Let me add also, this part of the whole picture is the interaction with the DOR, and what businesses are collecting, not just these businesses we're talking about today, but I think our auditor and some of his folks on his staff to get a reconciliation to make sure that everyone who is paying, not just short-term rental, but everyone who is supposed to be paying sales tax and part of our diversion, our 18.5%, we get the right count. So again, with the different databases and the different ways, the TAP account, which is pretty much state of the art with regard to paying sales tax. I mean, it's a matter of making sure that everybody's, if your location is in Biloxi and do part of the 18.5% diversion, that we get it, and we reconcile businesses to Biloxi, not just other places. So you're right. There's some easy ways to track once you match up the licenses and whatever types of business. So,
yes, go ahead, Robert.
I'm done.
I wasn't interrupting you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say to the Planning Commission, I think you guys do a great job, and I think the council does a great job too. With leaving certain zones conditional, I think we on this board take into consideration our community's wants and desires. And I think we take that extremely seriously, and I think so does the Planning Commission. I don't think that that's a problem, that we will face that in the future. I think this plan is getting better, and it will get better every day. Now, not to harp on something, but it just hit me. If we're requiring, even only on the application, these people to tell us where they're advertising, well, if it's the application, why are they advertising?
Well, I mean, we're running into that right now where they're advertising all over. That's how we're finding most of these places.
So is that requirement to find out if they've been operating illegally?
Whether they submit that to us or not. What the short of this is,
Well, whether they submit it to you or not, they have to by this ordinance.
the short of our recommendation on this was, if everybody's coming for conditional use, there is someone in the system telling them that they have to have a license. If we continue to allow it as a use by right, there's nobody in the system telling them that they have to have a license. And that was the very condensed version of this.
And Airbnb is not going to tell
No,
them.
they will not release information to us, so we have to go online and manually find it. That's what we have to do.
Okay, who else? Dr. Tisdale?
They need a license.
I'll just, and I'll consider these my concluding comments. Really. But here's some thoughts. I've given this a lot of thought. I think it'd be great if we had a button on the city's homepage directing prospective short-term rental property owners or purchasers to ordinances and zoning restrictions on short-term rentals with links to the appropriate forms as well, that we serve, and I think we will, by publishing the ordinance revised, whatever the revisions are, accordingly, that we certainly make known what the fine is and what it used to be and what it is now. If we're moving to $500 per day per violation, it looks like we are. I would also suggest that we maintain, whoever's monitoring short-term rentals for the city, that we maintain and publish a list of approved short-term rental properties, updated whether it's weekly, monthly, or quarterly, but that somebody can go online to see if what they're renting or want to purchase or whatever is, in fact, currently operating as a short-term rental in the city. That also we meet with, I think they have a Coast Realty Association, maybe Biloxi Ocean Springs, or used to years ago, I don't know, but if there are realty organizations here along the coast, that we educate them on what these revisions are that we're talking about today and what the city expectations are. That's it. And the other thing is we really have to do a good job of enforcement, and it pleases me greatly that somebody's job is going to be monitoring this, but then we really have to follow through municipal court and really work that issue of enforcement. And I hadn't said it, but I appreciate the work that the Planning Commission does. I've sat through all these meetings and listened to all the arguments and the comments, and they really do a good job. And thank you for the hard work, Jerry.
Thank you, Dr. Tisdale. Okay, it's been moved and it's been second. Mr. Barrett, do you want to? I think the original one was moved by Dr. Tisdale and I think myself. But the amendment, I'm asking for the amendment. All right, Peter, say that again? You giving him the amendment, okay? So you're going to move the amendment, okay? We need a second on the amendment. Second by Mr. Glavin. Okay, would you kind of read some of that into it?
Can I suggest that what he talked about, that the council could pass, maybe could table this for 1 week to look at we'll call it the Barrett version of this ordinance, and then we could approve it at the next meeting.
There are a lot of changes.
But
so basically, we need to go ahead and rewrite it.
We're taking bits and pieces. Yeah, we're taking bits. We just don't have time to
Okay, so I need you to take back your second and your first and your second. So move it to table it to the next meeting. And I need a second by Mr. Glavin. Okay, any questions?
Just to note, the next meeting is 2 weeks from today, not next
Night
Tuesday,
meeting.
so everybody understands.
This will just be to vote on we're tabling the current language and just voting on the updated language that we all agreed on at the next meeting. Correct. Okay.
Vote on the language. Okay. It's been moved. It's been second. Any more questions? All in favor? 7-0. It's tabled to the next meeting. Consent agenda. I need a motion on it.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Glavin, second by Dr. Tisdale. All right, George, we're going to go with you first. EFG, yes.
I said we had on G, we had $500,000 for lights. I said on G,
G,
we had
as in golf.
$500,000 for lights on the gate on Keesler property. There was no lights at all ever listed in that project? G and George.
So the change order in front of you is for the roadway lights on the inside portion of the Keesler Gate project. When the project was originally bid, the projects that the base is doing themselves, we kind of had to coordinate the lighting system with them, and they weren't far enough along in their design for us to include it in the original package, so that's why it's coming to you via change
So
order.
this is an additional 500,000,
Correct.
26 light poles.
Correct, yes.
Okay, I was just wondering.
They're expensive lights.
That was a lot. That's a lot to add on.
It is.
I was just wondering.
Yep.
On the other one too, Mike, on the I, they got $40,000 for Neil Schaefer. Is that a one-time payment, 40,000? Because it says paid monthly, but I think it's just a one-time payment, isn't it? I. Right. So that's our 40,000 is our 20%. Okay, that's it.
Okay, Ms. Newman? Nothing? Rob? Okay, nothing. Dr. Tisdale?
Yeah, we don't have anybody here from Neil Schaefer, do we? I don't think so. I'd like just to have item J on the consent agenda table, to have a question to ask the Neil Schaefer rep, and he's not here at this meeting. We'll just table it till the next meeting.
Table check. Okay.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead and move that?
I'd make that motion.
Okay, move it. I'll second it. Any questions?
No problem.
All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. 2
That's
gone.
what is it, J?
Okay.
Table?
J is table. Yeah, 2 weeks, yes. Okay, anything else, Dr. Tisdale?
That's it, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Glavin? None?
I have none.
No Barrett? None. And I have nothing. Okay, all in favor? Okay, 5-0. Motion carried. Note that Mr. Barrett. Okay, and Ms. Newman abstained from, Code enforcement hearings?
You left?
Mr.
Jerry left.
Jerry?
Mr. Shambra.
Chamber.
Oh,
Yeah,
Jerry.
Mr. Shambra.
Mr. Shambra? Are you gonna be the new Jerry?
There you go, Ed. You're thrown into the breach. We also serve who stand and wait.
They may be.
Before we get into the, I'd like to ask the mayor a question. You mind just, this is pertaining to the pickleball thing. Is it possible that we could help them with the 4,500 to pay Gulf Coast to keep that going, or what steps we would need to take?
Anything's possible with a budget amendment.
Say again?
Anything's possible with a budget amendment.
All right. I mean, I just think it's a good program through the junior college. I don't, you know, they got 2 months, they do that. I just think there's some way we need to help them. So we need to put something back on the table like for next week for the 4,500, okay. Or the next meeting, whenever we meet.
Are we ready?
It's up to you.
Y'all ready? Okay. First item on the agenda, item A, is Bobby Claude Lewis and Willie Ruth Hope. This is located at 262 Lemieux Street. It's actually item A and item E. One is the house, one is the shed, and it's still in violation.
Okay,
Doing two of them?
yeah, it's the
A and
same,
E.
A and E.
Freeze, okay. This house is, we've been dealing with this for a number of years, and this house, we get it secured, and then the windows get, the barricades get torn off again. It has no utilities, and people are occupying the house, and it's still in violation.
Is this the first hearing, Jerry?
Oh.
Hearing A?
He's already had an extension.
Yeah.
This is A, right? This is the first.
Yeah, this is the first time for A, which is the shed. The shed was left off. Item E is the one that was granted the extension, and that's on the house itself.
We're doing A and E together.
Okay. Yes.
Anyone here to speak on behalf of Mr. Bobby Lewis?
Mm-mm.
And then we come out and look. If I invite people on the council to come out. But I can do it.
Okay, Ms. Lewis, thank you. We're gonna, Mr. Krill, I'm gonna ask if you give him a hand, and we're gonna consider that matter closed.
Okay.
Okay? So that matter's closed.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move on to item B.
Item B on the agenda, Johnny Olson, 163 Rossetti Street. Actually, B and C are two parcels that are right next to each other. I'm not sure if you can tell from the pictures, but there was a structure fire here. All of these buildings are in very bad shape. There's an old RV on the property that's been gutted. And of course, it's still in violation. This is the,
Okay. Okay, any, let's see, is that it? Got it. Yeah, we're gonna find out in a second.
and I have more pictures if
Okay.
you want to see them.
Anyone else, anyone here to speak on behalf of Johnny Olson? Anyone here to speak on behalf of Johnny Olson? Okay, we'll consider that matter closed. D?
Item D, Tracy Elizabeth Smith, 6133 Stacy Lane. This property is still in violation.
6133.
And this is just overgrowth.
Okay. Okay, anyone here to speak on behalf of Tracy Elizabeth Smith? Yes, ma'am, could you come on up? Yes, could you come on up? Okay, ma'am, could you tell us about your property? Can you get it done in a significant amount of?
In less
amount
than
of-
what?
Can you get it done in a significant amount of time of having it trimmed back?
I'm working on it right now. I had the trailer torn down, and I had the frame out there, and now I've got the frame took out. Now, Back Bay Mission helped me remove the trailer, to tear it down with the frame still there. But anyway, we got that out. They got a porta potty on my land, which I guess Back Bay hired. I called that place today. I stopped by a man I know that I used to work with, Mr. Cotton, on Highway 67, to see about cutting it off.
Okay, how much time you think you need?
I'd say about a month.
A month?
A month.
30 days? Okay, we'll give you, okay, moved by Mr. Lawrence.
Second.
Second by Dr. Tisdale. Any questions? All in favor? 7-0. Okay, you got time. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, item F.
Item F and item G. And this is Charles Darren and Melissa Malfrey, 10251 Eagle Point Circle. Still in violation. I'm sorry? Nothing.
Okay.
It's still,
Okay.
you can still see that we've got trees and limb piles and everything else on the
Is
property.
there anyone to speak on behalf of Charles Darwin and Melissa?
I have
Any-
a question, Jerry. What is left on this property?
You got the fallen trees and limbs, the debris that's still on it. The grass has been cut, yes, but,
Yeah, I had talked to them. I know these people. They live in Van Cleve. They own this property from before Katrina. And if we can give them 30 more days, I'll make sure they get it cleaned up. I don't know if they understood that they had to get the trees up, because she called me and told me that they had everything mowed. And so I don't know that.
Okay, moved by Mr. Barrett, second by Mr. Lawrence. Any questions? All in favor? Okay, 6-0, motion carried. Thank you, Mr. Scurio.
Okay.
I need a motion on the routine agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Tisdale. Second by Mr. Barrett. Any questions, George?
Yeah, Keith, give us some good news here. We got $1,700,000, appreciate that, good.
Okay. Any other questions on the routine agenda? All right, all in favor? 7-0, motion carried. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Paul
This
made
one?
the motion. Nathan seconded it for the routine agenda.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Tisdale, second by Mr. Lawrence. All in favor? 7-0.